One man stood in the middle of a dusty street, his badge shining under the burning sun. Across from him, 7 armed outlaws. No backup, no escape, just silence and the sound of hands hovering near gun holsters. Everyone believed this sheriff would die before sunset. But history would remember that day very differently. Welcome to Untold Golden History. Today, we uncover a true frontier story buried beneath time. A story of courage, cruelty, fear, and an unexpected stand against evil. This is the story of the sheriff who fought an entire outlaw gang alone. The town no one wanted to protect. In the late 1870s, deep in the American frontier, there was a town so violent that even criminals feared it. The town had no grand name. Maps barely mentioned it. But the people who lived there remembered it as a place where law arrived late, if it arrived at all. Wooden buildings leaned like tired men. The saloon never closed. Gunshots were more common than church bells. Families locked their doors before sunset. Children learned early not to cry too loud. And in this forgotten place, the town council made a desperate decision. They hired a sheriff that no one else wanted. Who the sheriff really was. His name was Elias Crow. He was not famous, he was not young, and he was not fast with a smile. Crow had scars on his hands, not from gunfights, but from work. Years earlier, he had been a farmer, a husband, a father. Until outlaws burned his land during a cattle raid. Until his wife died from sickness because the nearest doctor was 2 days away. Until his son vanished during a stagecoach robbery, never found. After that, Elias Crow stopped being a man who hoped. He became a man who endured. When the town offered him the badge, they paid him little. They offered no deputies, no proper jail, just a revolver, a worn badge, and expectations no human could survive. Crow accepted anyway. A lawman without illusions. Elias knew the truth the moment he arrived. This town didn't respect law, it feared gangs. And the most feared of all was the Black River Gang. They were not boys playing outlaw. They were veterans of violence, former Confederate guerrillas, train robbers, killers who laughed after pulling triggers. 7 men, each with a reputation. They controlled cattle routes, supply wagons, and fear itself. Merchants paid them protection. Sheriffs before Crow had either fled or been buried. The first warning. 3 weeks after Crow took the badge, a dead horse left in the middle of Main Street, its saddle stained with blood. Carved into the wood of the saloon door were words burned by hot iron, "Leave or die." The townspeople begged him to run. Even the mayor avoided eye contact. Crow said nothing. That night he cleaned his revolver slowly, not because he expected victory, but because he believed law meant standing still when fear begged you to move. The gang arrived. They came at noon. Dust rose first, then horses, then men, riding wide, confident, smiling. 7 outlaws entered the town like they already owned it. Crow stepped onto the street alone. No deputy behind him, no rifle from a window, just his boots in the dirt and a badge pinned over a tired heart. The gang leader dismounted. His name was Caleb Rourke, a man known for killing sheriffs slowly. "You the law?" Rourke asked. Crow nodded once. Rourke laughed. "So you're either brave or already dead." Cruelty in broad daylight. To make their point, the gang dragged a young shopkeeper into the street, a boy no older than 16, hands shaking, eyes searching for mercy. Rourke pressed a revolver to the boy's head. This is what happens when towns forget who rules them. Crow spoke, quiet, steady. "Let the boy go."
The gang laughed again. That was when Crow moved. The first gunshot echoed like thunder. Crow fired before Rourke finished turning. The bullet shattered Rourke's shoulder, knocking him backward. Chaos erupted. Glass broke. Horses screamed. People ran. Crow dove behind a water trough as bullets tore into wood and stone. He counted shots. He remembered angles. He remembered something his old mentor once said. A gunfight isn't about speed. It's about thinking while others panic. 1 man against 7. Crow moved like a man who had nothing left to lose. He fired, relocated, fired again, used corners, used shadows, used fear against them. 1 outlaw fell when Crow shattered his knee. Another bled out after charging blindly. The gang expected weakness. They found resistance. Minutes felt like hours. The town watched from cracks and walls, believing they were witnessing a man's last stand. The moment of realization. Caleb Rourke, wounded and furious, screamed orders, but something had changed. This was no longer a hunt. This was a fight. And for the first time in years, the Black River Gang understood something terrifying. This sheriff was not afraid to die.
The gun smoke hung low over the street, mixing with dust and fear. Elias Crow pressed his back against the side of the general store, chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. He had 3 bullets left. 3. Across the street, the Black River Gang regrouped. Their laughter was gone now. In its place, rage, disbelief, and wounded pride. Caleb Rourke spat blood into the dirt and screamed, "Burn him out!" A bottle smashed against the saloon wall. Flames crawled upward, licking dry wood. Smoke thickened, blinding, choking. Inside nearby homes, mothers pressed children under beds. Old men prayed silently. No one dared step outside. Crow knew fire would end this quickly, for him or for them. He moved. Not forward, sideways. He kicked open the back door of the barber shop and vanished inside, just as bullets shredded the doorway he'd been leaning against seconds before. Inside, the smell of soap and hair oil mixed with smoke. Mirrors shattered as rounds tore through glass. Crow smashed through the back window and rolled into the alley, his shoulder scraping brick, blood warm against his sleeve. Pain reminded him he was still alive. He remembered another alley, another time. Years earlier, before the badge, before the town, Elias Crow had been running through fire of a different kind. The night his farm burned, he had stood helpless as flames devoured everything he built. His wife, Sarah, coughing violently beside him, his son, Thomas, crying in terror. Outlaws had laughed then, too. Crow had begged men with guns to stop. They hadn't. That night taught him something brutal. Mercy does not live where cruelty rules. A scream pulled him back to the present. A woman. Crow peeked around the alley corner and saw one of the outlaws dragging a pregnant woman from her house, using her as a shield. Her face was pale with terror, hands clutching her belly. Crow's jaw tightened. Caleb Rourke shouted, "Come out, Sheriff, or she dies." The woman sobbed. The town watched. History held its breath. Crow stepped into the open. Every gun swung toward him. "Let her go," he said. Rourke grinned. "Drop the gun." Crow did. The revolver hit dirt. The outlaw holding the woman laughed and shoved her to the ground. She screamed as she fell, curling protectively around her stomach. Rourke raised his pistol, savoring the moment. That was when Crow kicked dirt into the air and lunged. The revolver he dropped was empty. The one hidden in his boot was not. He fired from the ground. The outlaw dropped instantly. Crow rolled, grabbed the fallen man's rifle, and fired twice more. Another outlaw collapsed, clutching his chest. The street exploded again.
Crow dragged the woman to safety, shoved her behind a wagon, and turned just as a bullet tore through his side. He screamed but stayed standing. Blood soaked his shirt. The world narrowed. Sound dulled. Still he fired. One outlaw fled on horseback, panic overtaking bravado. Another crawled, crying, begging. Caleb Rourke stood alone now, wounded, shaking, staring at a sheriff who should already be dead. "You should have run," Rourke whispered. Crow stepped closer, every movement agony. "So should you." Rourke reached for his gun. Crow fired first. Silence fell. The dust settled slowly, like ash after a funeral. 6 outlaws lay dead or dying. 1 had escaped. Crow dropped to his knees. The town emerged cautiously. Someone screamed his name. Someone else cried. Hands lifted him, carried him, pressed cloth against wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. As Crow drifted in and out of consciousness, he heard a child's voice. "Is he gonna live?" No one answered. Crow drifted between worlds. In his mind he saw Thomas, older now, standing at the edge of a river. "Pa?" the boy asked. Crow tried to speak. No sound came. "I didn't run," Crow whispered finally. "I stood." Thomas smiled sadly. "I know." Crow woke days later. The town had changed. Windows were repaired. People smiled, hesitant, disbelieving smiles. The saloon was quiet. The badge lay on the table beside him, polished. A doctor told him he survived by inches. The mayor cried when he saw him awake. But Crow felt no triumph, because he knew something they didn't. The Black River Gang was not finished. The one who escaped would tell the story, and others would come. That night, Crow sat alone, stitching his own wound. Outside, the town slept peacefully for the first time in years. Crow stared at the badge, fingers trembling. He finally understood something deeper than victory. Law wasn't about winning gunfights. It was about standing when no one else could, and paying the price alone.
The man who escaped rode through the night without stopping. His name was Jonah Pike, the youngest of the Black River Gang. He had joined them for money, for fear, for survival, but never for belief. As his horse pounded across the plains, Pike's hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the reins. Behind him, 6 men lay dead. Ahead of him, the truth waited. By dawn, Pike reached a mining camp miles away and told the story in a whisper that spread faster than gunfire. A sheriff had stood alone. A sheriff had won. A sheriff had broken the Black River Gang. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, men who had once ridden beside Caleb Rourke began to listen. In the town, Elias Crow healed slowly. His body recovered faster than his spirit. At night, pain woke him, not from wounds, but from memories. The sound of screams, the crack of gunfire, the look in Rourke's eyes when he realized power could bleed. Crow knew the pattern of the frontier well. Violence never ended, it only paused. The townspeople celebrated him as a hero. They brought food, gifts, thanks whispered through tears. Children stared at him like he was a storybook knight. Crow smiled when required, but alone he sharpened his knife and counted ammunition. Weeks later, the first sign arrived. A riderless horse stumbled into town at sunset. Its saddle was empty. Its flank bore a fresh brand, a Black River mark burned deep. Crow touched the scarred hide and closed his eyes. They were coming. The town council argued loudly. "Hire deputies, send for the army, pay them off." Crow listened quietly, then spoke. "They won't be paid. They won't be reasoned with.
and soldiers won't arrive in time. Fear filled the room. "So what do we do?" the mayor asked. Crow looked at the people he had sworn to protect, shopkeepers, widows, fathers, children. He said, "We stand together, or we don't stand at all." Silence followed. Then a blacksmith stood. "I'll help." A school teacher followed, then a farmer, a preacher, a woman who had lost her husband to the gang. None of them knew how to fight well, but for the first time they believed they didn't have to fight alone. That night, Crow told them the truth he had never shared. He told them about his son, about Thomas. Years earlier, after the stagecoach robbery, Crow had searched for weeks, then months, then years, every rumor, every grave, every prison camp, until one night, in a border town, a dying outlaw had whispered a confession. They had taken the boy, not for ransom, for cruelty. They had forced Thomas to run across a river under gunfire to amuse themselves. Crow never found the body. That was the moment Crow stopped believing the world was fair, and the moment he decided that evil would never again go unchallenged, not where he stood. The townspeople listened in tears. They no longer saw a sheriff. They saw a man who had already lost everything. The attack came 3 days later, at dawn. Gunfire tore through the eastern ridge. Horses thundered. Men screamed orders. This was not 7 outlaws. This was an army. Former Black River riders, hired guns, men chasing reputation. They came to erase a lesson they could not accept, that law once had won. Crow rang the town bell. People took positions behind barricades they had built together. Hands shook. Prayers were whispered. Crow stood at the front again, not alone this time. The battle was chaos. Gunshots echoed endlessly. Smoke blinded. Screams cut through the air. Crow moved through it like a ghost, calm, precise, deadly. But numbers matter. A bullet struck the preacher. The blacksmith fell. A young boy bled in the dirt, crying for his mother. Crow dragged him to cover, hands slick with blood. "This isn't your fight," the boy sobbed. Crow shook his head. "It is, because you live here." As the fight raged, Crow saw something that froze his blood. Across the street, among the attackers, was a man limping badly, a man with a familiar face, older, hardened, but unmistakable. "Thomas," Crow whispered. The man turned. Their eyes met. The world stopped. The man hesitated, his gun lowered slightly. "Pa?" he said. Crow's breath caught in his throat. His son was alive, but not innocent, not untouched, not the boy he remembered. Thomas wore outlaw colors. Crow stepped forward slowly. "Drop the gun," he said softly. Thomas shook his head, tears filling his eyes. "They made me," he whispered. "I didn't have a choice." Crow understood the truth instantly. The frontier had stolen his son twice. A gunshot cracked. Thomas fell. Crow screamed. He ran through bullets, through fire, through death itself, dropping beside his son as blood spread beneath him. "I tried to survive," Thomas gasped. "I tried." Crow pressed his hands against the wound, shaking. You did," whispered Crow. Thomas smiled weakly. "Pa, you stood." Then his eyes closed forever. Something broke inside Elias Crow. He stood, and the remaining attackers fled, not because they were defeated, but because they had seen something worse than death, a man who had lost everything and kept standing. By sunset, the town still stood. So did Crow, barely. He buried his son himself. No speech, No words, just dirt and silence. In the weeks that followed, no outlaw returned. The story spread across the frontier of a sheriff, of a town that stood, of a price paid too high to ignore. Crow remained sheriff until the day he died. He didn't need to.
The grave was simple. No carved stone, no long prayer, just a wooden marker pressed into the earth by a father's shaking hands. Elias Crow stood alone after the others left. The wind moved through the grass, whispering like voices that had no bodies anymore. He stayed until the sky darkened, until grief turned from sharp pain into something heavier, something permanent. Thomas was gone, but the world did not stop. It never did. The days after the battle passed slowly. The town rebuilt again, this time with quiet respect, not celebration. People spoke in lower voices. Children no longer played guns in the street. They had seen the cost. Crow returned to duty within a week. The doctor protested. The mayor begged. Crow said nothing. He put on the badge, tied his boots, and walked the street like a man walking through memory. At night, he dreamed of rivers. Word traveled far beyond the plains. Newspapers in eastern cities printed exaggerated versions of the story. Some called him the Iron Sheriff. Others called him the man who would not fall. They left out the part where he sat alone at night staring at an empty chair. They left out the silence. One afternoon, a stranger rode into town. He wore a long coat and carried papers sealed with red wax. His horse was well fed. His hands were clean. Not a frontier man. Crow watched him carefully. The stranger introduced himself as a representative of the territorial government. He offered Crow a promotion, marshal status, authority over multiple towns, better pay, protection. "You've done more than most men ever will," the man said. "You deserve peace." Crow looked at the paper. Then he looked at the street, at the buildings rebuilt by hands that had once been afraid, at the children walking freely. "This town needs a sheriff," Crow said. The stranger hesitated. "You could save more lives elsewhere." Crow nodded slowly. "Maybe," he said, "but I couldn't save my son." The stranger left the next morning. Years passed. Outlaw gangs avoided the town entirely. They whispered Crow's name like a warning, not a challenge. Crime did not disappear, but cruelty no longer ruled. Crow aged quickly. His hair turned white, his hands stiffened, his eyes carried stories no one dared ask him to tell. Yet he never raised his voice, never threatened, he only stood. One winter, a boy was brought to him in chains. The boy had stolen bread. Hungry, dirty, terrified, the townspeople demanded punishment. Crow looked at the boy for a long time. Then he unlocked the chains. "Go eat," he said. The crowd protested. Crow turned. "If you're hungry enough to steal, you're hungry enough to deserve help." The crowd fell silent. Karma, Crow had learned, was not about revenge. It was about breaking cycles. That night, Crow dreamed of Thomas again. This time his son stood older than Crow remembered, strong, calm. "You don't carry it alone anymore," Thomas said. Crow woke with tears on his face. As the frontier slowly gave way to railroads and laws written far away, Crow became something rare, a living reminder. Travelers stopped to look at him. Some asked for stories. He refused most. Once, a young lawman asked him the secret to survival. Crow thought for a long time. "Know what you're willing to lose and what you refuse to lose." The end came quietly. No guns, no fire. Crow collapsed one morning while sweeping the jail steps. The doctor said his heart had simply grown tired. He died before sunset.
The town rang the bell, once. They buried him beside his son. This time the marker had words. Elias Crow, he stood. Men who once feared gangs wept openly. Women placed flowers. Children asked why the town felt different without him. An old man answered softly, because courage lived here, and now it rests. Years later, the town would grow into a city, streets paved over dust, buildings replaced wood. But one thing never changed. At the center of the old square stood a statue, a man in a long coat, a badge, no gun raised, just standing. And every sheriff who took office after learned the same lesson carved into stone beneath his feet. Law is not about power, it is about presence.
Time did what no outlaw ever could. It softened the edges. Years after Elias Crow was laid beside his son, people began to tell the story differently, not falsely, but gently. Painful details were smoothed, names were shortened, fear was replaced with pride. Children learned the story in school as legend first, history second. A sheriff, a gang, a stand. But those who had lived through it knew the truth ran deeper. The old blacksmith's daughter became a teacher. She told her students not just about courage, but about cost. She described the sound of gunfire echoing off wood, the smell of blood and smoke, the way bravery sometimes looked like shaking hands. She told them heroes are not born fearless, they are born human. Travelers came to see the statue. Some laughed. Just one man, they said, just a badge? But the older residents corrected them. He didn't stand alone, they said, not in the end. And that mattered. The frontier changed. Railroads cut through open land. Telegraph wires crossed the sky. Judges replaced gunmen. Laws replaced instincts. Yet violence never vanished completely. Every generation faced its own version of chaos, and in every generation, someone remembered Elias Crow. One summer, decades later, a young sheriff arrived from the East. He was educated, clean, confident. On his first day, he stood before the statue and read the words aloud. He stood. That night, trouble came. A group of armed men attempted to rob a rail office, believing the town had grown soft with age. They were wrong. The sheriff stood his ground. So did the people. No blood was spilled. History echoed, not as tragedy, but as warning. In archives far away, historians debated Crow's story. Some argued the numbers were exaggerated. Some questioned the timelines. Some demanded proof. They never found enough. Because not all truth lives on paper. Some lives only in choices repeated. A letter surfaced once, written by Jonah Pike, the outlaw who escaped. Old, shaking handwriting. He confessed everything. He described the fear in the gang's eyes, the moment they realized violence had limits, the instant Elias Crow became more than a man. I ran, Pike wrote, but he stood, and that difference haunted me every day after. The letter ended with one line. Some men kill to be remembered, some stand so others can live. The town kept the letter framed, not as proof, as a reminder. Years passed again. The last person who remembered Crow's voice died quietly in her sleep. With her went first-hand memory, but not meaning. The statue weathered storms. Rain wore lines into stone that looked like tears. Visitors still stopped. Some felt something they couldn't explain. A heaviness, a calm. One child once asked his father why the statue had no gun raised.
The father thought carefully. "Because the gun wasn't the point," he said. "The choice was." History books would eventually shorten the story to a paragraph, a date, a name, a summary. But history, like courage, was never meant to be efficient. It was meant to be felt. On the 100th anniversary of the battle, the town rang the bell again. Once. Just once. And in that sound lived every fear faced, every stand taken, every life changed by a man who refused to move when moving would have been easier. Far from there, a troubled boy read the story late one night. He closed the book slowly. The world felt cruel, but less hopeless. Because somewhere in the past, a sheriff had proven a simple and permanent thing. Evil does not always lose, but it never wins quietly. Long after the bell rang for the last time, long after the last eyewitness turned to dust, the town continued to live with something invisible but powerful. A standard. People did not speak Elias Crow's name every day. They didn't need to. His presence lived in how doors stayed unlocked at night, how children walked freely, how disputes were settled with words instead of fists. Courage had reshaped behavior. In another part of the country, a historian once wrote that the Wild West was won by numbers, by railroads, armies, and laws. He was half right. The other half belonged to men like Crow, men who stood before order existed and acted as if it already mattered. The truth was never that Elias Crow defeated an entire outlaw gang alone. The truth was harder. He chose to stand, knowing he would probably lose. He chose law when law had no power. He chose responsibility when escape was easier. That choice echoed. Decades later, during a time of unrest and fear in a different America, a reporter visited the town. He asked an old woman what made the place different. She thought for a moment. "Nothing special," she said. "We just remember what happens when nobody stands." At sunset, the statue cast a long shadow across the square. People passed through it without noticing, but it touched them anyway. Somewhere far away, another sheriff faced another impossible moment. No gang this time, no crowd watching, just a decision. He remembered a story he once heard, and he stood. History does not move forward because of legends. It moves forward because ordinary people repeat extraordinary choices. Elias Crow never wanted to be remembered. He only wanted one town to survive the night. It did. And that is why his story endures. Not because he fought alone, but because he proved that one person, standing at the right moment, can change what fear believes is inevitable. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Follow this page and subscribe for more true stories of courage, sacrifice, and untold American history.